Thank you very much. The Speaker asked to use such time as I may require.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Let me start by saying that this is evidence of the important commitment that the Judiciary Committee has to the issues of criminal justice, but as well recognizes the title of this committee that covers crime, terrorism, homeland security, and investigations. So I want to thank the chairman, Mr. Goodlatte, for working with me and his staff, along with Mr. Conyers, the ranking member, and his staff, and of course for Mr. Ratcliffe for his support of my legislation, H.R. 4240, the No-Fly for Foreign Fighters Act. I particularly want to thank the staff because, as they well know, my late staff, Tiffany Jocelyn, worked very hard with staff members as well on this legislation. And so here we are today with an important initiative coming out of the Judiciary Committee, working collaboratively, and I believe that is extremely important. As a senior member of the House Committee on Homeland Security and the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee Subcommittee on Crime, Terrorism, Homeland Security, and Investigations, the topic of threats to Homeland Security has always been a particular concern to me. But over the last couple of months, maybe over the last couple of years, as we've seen ISIL raise its ugly head, we've heard of Americans going for the fight, joining or being part of the caliphate. We heard of ISIS members moving around, particularly in Europe, moving from country to country. Some may say that they're crossing in a number of modes of transportation, but we also know that they're using aviation modes of transportation. And therefore, they pose a serious threat. I initially introduced the No-Fly for Foreign Fighters Act after the investigation of an attempt to detonate explosives on a Northwest Airlines on Christmas Day 2009. Yes, Mr. Speaker, that was a long time ago. Investigation of the incident revealed that counterterrorism agencies had information that raised flags about this individual referred to as the underwear bomber, but the dots were not connected, and he was not placed in the terrorist screening database or the TSDB. This incident shone a light on potential gaps in our watching and screening process, and that resulted in significant improvements. That said, questions about the system remain. In fact, it is not uncommon to see news of a flight being diverted or an emergency landing because a passenger happened to be on the no-fly list, but there was a delay in getting that information. We're here today, Mr. Speaker, to really ensure that we get it right, because one wrong time, again, jeopardizes maybe hundreds or thousands of lives. It is even more common to read articles about the frequency of false positives and individuals being mistakenly identified as being on the list, causing them and their fellow passenger significant delay and frustration. I remember having been on the Homeland Security Committee since the heinous and tragic terrorist act of 9/11. In those early days, members of Congress, United States senators, and others were on the no-fly list. While it may, after the fact, be a little bit humorous, it is not. And so we must get it right. The issue of false positives is something that I know many of my colleagues on the committee are particularly interested in, as well as groups such as the ACLU, who was kept very busy by so many people being on, wrongly so. In light of the events of the last 12 months, however, the issue of Homeland Security, and in particular, the accuracy of our screening and watch listing process, has become even more significant to me. More than 30,000 foreign fighters from at least 100 different countries have traveled to Syria and Iraq to fight ISIL since 2011. I want to say that number again. 30,000 foreign fighters have traveled, and that means they may return and move throughout Europe or attempt to come to the United States. In the last 18 months, the number of foreign fighters traveling to Syria and Iraq has more than doubled. If those individuals try to go throughout places in Europe or elsewhere or to the United States, the mode of transportation would be aviation. In the first 6 months of 2015, more than 7,000 foreign fighters have arrived in Syria and Iraq. Of those traveling to Syria and Iraq to fight for the Islamic State terrorist group, it is estimated that at least 250 hold U.S. citizenship. Mr. Speaker, my colleagues, we only need one. The accuracy of our terrorist screening tools is more critical now than ever before. That is why I work with Chairman Mr. Ratcliffe and Mr. Conyers to introduce 4240, which mandates an independent review of the TSDB's operation and administration. Although the Inspector General for the Department of Justice conducts annual audits of TSDB, there's not been an independent review since the GAO study after the 2009 incident. H.R. 4240 directs the GAO to conduct an independent review of the operation and administration of TSDB and subsets of the TSDB to assess whether past weaknesses have been addressed, the extent to which existing vulnerabilities may be resolved or mitigated through additional changes. This legislation is drafted broadly to allow the GAO to conduct a comprehensive review, not just of the TSDB's accuracy, but of its entire operation administration in the name of securing the American people. Following its study, the GAO will submit a report to the House and Senate Judiciary Committees with its findings and any recommendations for improvements. I'm very glad that my colleagues joined me in shortening that time frame in which a report is to come back so that we can quickly move to urge any changes that needs to be made in the list to be accurate and to secure the nation. Let me close by thanking the members of this committee who are co-sponsors of H.R. 4240 and urge my colleagues to vote to send this critical and timely bipartisan legislation to the House floor, which we are now, and I thank you and reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves. Gentleman from Texas. Virginia, excuse me. Gentleman from Texas. Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from Texas.
It is my privilege to yield to the distinguished ranking member who now is the dean of this House, Mr. Conyers, for as much time as he may consume.
Gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the author of this bill, the gentlelady from Texas, who first saw the importance of it, and I want to tell you that this measure before us today strengthens the terrorist screening database maintained by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and in doing so, aids in our efforts to combat terrorism and keep our nation safe. The FBI's Terrorist Screening Center helps to identify known and suspected terrorists by integrating information collected by law enforcement and the intelligence community. Since its inception in 2003, this sophisticated watch list and screening system has undoubtedly saved lives. But despite the work of the dedicated individuals who make the screening database possible, this system is not flawless. Past incidents, such as the 2009 Christmas Day attempted attack on a Northwest Airlines flight bound for my hometown of Detroit, already mentioned by the gentlelady from Texas, has put a spotlight on potential gaps in the system. Over the years since, the FBI has made significant improvements to the database. Audits by the Department of Justice's Office of the Inspector General reveal movement in the right direction, but to date, no independent review has been conducted to evaluate the sufficiency of these changes. H.R. 4240 addresses this precise issue by directing the Government Accountability Office to conduct a review of the operation and administration of the terrorist screening database. This review will assess whether past weaknesses have been eliminated and the extent to which existing vulnerabilities may be addressed or mitigated through additional changes. An independent audit will give us the tools we need to make additional changes if necessary. I want to commend once again the distinguished gentlelady from Texas, Sheila Jackson Lee, ranking member of the Subcommittee on Crime, Terrorism, Homeland Security, and Investigations of the Judiciary Committee, for her leadership on this important issue. I also want to thank the chairman of the full committee, Chairman Goodlatte, and former chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Chairman Sensenbrenner, for their assistance in bringing this important legislation to the floor today. And so I join with all of those who are with us in supporting this measure, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from Virginia.
Mr. Speaker, we continue to reserve. I believe we have the right to close.
Gentlewoman from Texas.
I believe we have no other speakers, and I'm prepared to close.
Gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
I thank you, and I'll yield myself such time as I may consume. Mr. Speaker, in concluding, a lot of thanks goes to, as I indicated, the Chairman Goodlatte, Ranking Member Conyers, and Mr. Ratliff, who is a member of the committee, my colleagues on Homeland Security as well, who have a great interest in this legislation. Our commitment in this legislation is to leave no stone unturned, no page unturned, and no iota of information that will be necessary to make this list a more viable and secure list. And that work now will be done by this legislation, No Fly for Foreign Terrorists. And it will help to make the Terrorist Screening Center an asset, a further asset to our Homeland Security infrastructure. We want to make certain that those men and women have the tools they need to continue to keep the nation safe. With 30,000 foreign fighters and others going every day, 250 Americans who have gone to the caliphate, have gone to the fight, individuals who may have an interest in returning to this country and doing us harm, doing us damage. I believe H.R. 4240 is the next step in ensuring that the screening and watch listing process works as it is intended to have worked, and works without as many errors as possible, errorless, if you will, because that is what we need to secure this nation. So I urge all of my colleagues to support this common sense bipartisan measure, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is good legislation. It's common sense to conduct a review of the terrorist watch listing process, and I urge my colleagues to support the legislation. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass Bill H.R. 4240 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.